Ahoy, ahoy, everyone. Welcome to the Fear and Loving with Ranch podcast. Recording this with my friends here on July 7th, 2020. We've been doing these for a few weeks now since the start of the 2020 revolution. And today's we are going to be talking about a hot topic, intersectionality within the movement. So we will be discussing commonality within the struggle, how the inclusion of a holistic view of activism around all issues, housing justice, food justice, LGBTQ justice, female justice, etc., could help the movement remain strong and relevant, and how allies from other justice groups must come together within this current and most important fight. And I have got returning guests today. We've got Rue Johnson, Joe Nice, Catherine Wells, and we'll let everybody go ahead and say hello and tell us a little about themselves. Rue, you want to kick it off? I'm stoked that you're back.
Sure, thank you. I'm really excited to be back and to be here with you. The conversation that we had a couple weeks ago with Ray and Joe Nice was on that one too, and Kayvon, I still think about so many parts of that conversation, particularly how Joe Nice pulled out the actual Constitution at the beginning of that call. So I don't know, I'm not trying to spoil it. I don't know if he has the Constitution laying around again. Thank you. As you can see, he's unfolding it. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, really stoked to be here because this conversation is so important. My name is Rue Johnson. I am a creative. I'm an executive producer and an operations strategist based in Denver, originally from the East Coast. And I found myself working in the music industry where I help artists create a platform for themselves and use their voices to amplify impactful subjects. The most important right now, of course, is the social uprising happening here in 2020, the year that will never end. And we have all really been working hard to create some strategies that will be long-term, but also help to meet some of our short-term goals, particularly defunding the police, having a broader understanding of city government, and providing educational messaging that is sort of removed of jargon, because that sometimes keeps people away from sort of the immediacy of what we need to do. So a lot of our big projects are around sort of demystifying the technique of city government, and that's what brings me here today. So really excited to talk with all of you about intersectionality and what we've all been experiencing as the world turns. So thank you for having me.
Of course, yeah, I love that idea of demystifying. What'd you say, the city government?
Yeah.
It's vital, you know. I mean, when we look at all of these huge shifts in our culture, it's 100% happening first on a local level. And if we are having trouble doing that right now, how are we going to get it done in a big way? Thank you so much, Drew. And Joe Nice with the scarf today.
Yeah. I'm scarfing it up. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Joe Nice, DJ, record label owner, 2 master's degrees, budding activist, worked with refugees in the past, worked with people in impoverished communities on the west side of Baltimore. And I am thankful to be involved again with these conversations. And the more I do them, the more that I'm finding my purpose in life, the more that I'm finding out that the 4 fights that consistently come up, humanity, freedom, equality, and survival, those 4 fights are ever present in current day 2020. They've been present in current, 2019, 1919, 1819, 1719, and 1619. So it's important that we stay vigilant. It's important that we keep our heads down and we continue to work, but at the same time, we keep our heads to the sky and we keep dreaming. And we keep dreaming of what America can and should be, and what America can and should and eventually will look like for everyone, not just America, because Cat Wells is a Canadian. So we want the same stuff for Canada. And and I was born in England, so I want stuff for my English brethren, as they like to say. And I got parents, and I got some parents from Trinidad, so I want some for my Trini brothers and sisters, So it's all of that around the world. We want everyone to live their best lives. We want everybody to be happy and free.
All right, and Kat, thanks for coming back again.
Thank Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's an honor to be invited to speak again, and I'm once again humbled by the presence of these amazing panelists. I'm currently working as an academic researcher in sociology after completing my master's degree last year in sociology of disasters and social movements. So I guess part of my identity is I'm a queer intersectional feminist, social justice activist, community builder, environmentalist, writer, educator, abolitionist. And I actually came to these chats through my friend Joe Nice, who has graciously agreed to continue to have weekly dialogues with me on Instagram, where we chat about social and racial justice issues. So thank you so much for having me.
And that was live and direct, but now it's Kat and Joe, or what did I hear today? Talk?
So we do a weekly one, and then Joe does the live and direct chats.
All right, so Joe does his, and sometimes you're a guest, and now you have, what's your show on Instagram?
Ours is like the Joe and Kat chats.
And that's on your Instagram?
Yeah.
All right.
So.
Yeah.
Instagram handles? What's your Instagram handle, Kat?
Yeah, so mine is Kat Wells 22, and it's Kat with a K.
Okay. Joe
Nice DJ, JoeNicedJ.
And Rue?
It's the perfect Rue, ROUX.
All right, and I'm Rancher Guerra, the one and only.
Nice.
Yes, well, thank you guys for being here. And I'm super excited about this topic. It was actually presented to me by Kat and Joe. You guys have spoke about it maybe a couple times, I think, on the chats. And I was able to kind of dive in a little bit, particularly into this Kimberly Crenshaw TED Talk from 2016, which, you know, ridiculous how 4 years have passed and it sounds like we're talking about the exact same thing. That TED Talk specifically in relation to women of color that have been killed at the hands of police who, you know, so many people don't know the names of still versus the men of color. Maybe Kat, you could kick us off a little bit. I think maybe you're who I've been speaking to. We spoke last night about this as well, but you can kind of educate the viewers and listeners about intersectionality, just basic.
Yeah, so Kimberly Crenshaw actually coined the term in 1989. So it's basically the definition, I guess, is like the interconnected nature of social categories such as race, class, gender, etc. And as they apply to like an individual or a group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. So what that means to us is basically that being a Black person and being a woman are two different identities, but being a Black woman is something that intersects those two things, and it creates a different way of showing up in the world and different ways in which you're marginalized or discriminated against. So that's sort of where it came from. And since then, I guess how I came to the word was, I guess, learning about the feminism movement and how the feminism movement sort of adopted this concept of intersectionality in order to be more inclusive to the varying identities involved in resisting patriarchy itself. So yeah, if anyone wants to comment on that.
Right. Go ahead, Rue.
Well, I was just going to say that I love the way you broke it down, because when I, like in my mind, when I'm thinking, when I hear the term intersectionality, I'm of course crossing all the streets. I'm like, and this one, and you know, and this is also an identity of mine, and this is also an identity of mine. And particularly as a Black woman, I've been having a lot of these conversations lately, almost like begrudgingly, because I find myself like up against Black men sometimes who feel like that when we say that Black and woman are two different identities that we have to contend with, that we have to, you know, we can be marginalized in various different ways. We have to strategize in different ways. I've been finding that I've been having to explain why some of the strategies and the methods of operation that we use to both explain ourselves and to progress forward in the movement, we have to contend with both of those identities. So specifically the intersectionality of being Black, you know, a lot of Black men I know are like Black men first. And a lot of Black women, both anecdotally, I can tell you, and then also, of course, historically and, you know, intellectually, I can tell you that many Black men, particularly able-bodied heterosexual Black men in the movement, have oftentimes like marginalized Black women in some of the same ways that they themselves have been marginalized and oppressed by white supremacy. So some of the intersections of the conversations of relationships between Black women and Black men have very much been a part of this sort of overarching umbrella notion of, do we want, you know, power, or do we want freedom? You know, are we out for liberation, or are we out to sort of prop ourselves up against some of the power standards that we've had to contend with all of our lives? So when I think about the intersectionality, then I'm like, okay, well then what about as like a queer Black woman? Like, what about as like a fat Black woman? What about as, you know, a Black woman from the South, or a Black woman, you know, there's lots of just different ways that these things intersect, but particularly around race, gender, you know, sexual identity. Those are the ones that I tend to go to the most when I talk about intersectionality.
And I do remember, you know, I had a moment following you online, and not just you, other Black women as well that I follow, having kind of coming up against this in different ways, and I do remember the song that came out by J. Cole, which, you know, I just have like always resonated with him, and his ability to like take me to like what it's like for young, specifically young people of color, but I guess maybe pretty much always male, being the perspective that he's coming from, obviously. And, you know, and for this song, like I was just ready for like more truth, and like I was just so ready for him to be super on point. And it was just odd that he chose to speak in the way that he did, in that like perspective, kind of communicating to women of color. And I know that was something that kind of you weren't all that.
I immediately woke up and wrote about that on Facebook, and right away was like, now I'm going to be fighting J. Cole fans all day, you know, which was really crazy. So just to give the sort of the overview of this, and J. Cole, of course, an American rapper. He's originally from North Carolina, Black man, wrote a song called Snow on the Bluff. And the song was essentially all about him chastising this Black woman for using essentially too many educated terms, and not being gentle with him, and not treating him like a child, and leading him towards the knowledge and feeding it to him gently. And he was referencing No Name, who is a rapper, a librarian, someone who has created, you know, wrote like just tons and tons of programming so that particularly Black women can find themselves educated by the movement in these particular ways. And she had mentioned that a lot of rappers weren't really saying anything about the social uprising, and name checked him directly. So then he wrote a song about not being spoon-fed the information gently. And I took offense to that because, of course, you know, Frances Cress Welsing has been telling us for a million years that Black men haven't left the crib, and they haven't left the tit, and all these other things. And I'm like, in addition to everything else that we have to deal with, J. Cole spent his time going into the studio and writing about how the information is being presented to him, and had zero to say about the Black women who've been killed by the police. At that time, George Floyd probably wasn't even cold on the slab, and J. Cole was writing songs about how Black women are presenting our knowledge and information in a way that's not gentle enough to him. And he had nothing to say about the actual social uprising and, you know, Black trans women, he had nothing to say about that. So I was very much like, again, Black women have to be the whipping boys sometimes for a lot of men in particular who grapple with our identities. So that's like the big hoopla from me for a second. I'm getting riled up already.
Well, I think I saw a hand raised for Kat. Did you have something you wanted to say for that?
Yeah, no, thank you for saying that, because that is something that I have also noticed myself as a white woman showing up in this movement. That's exactly how white women expect Black women to treat them as well, and I think that that is garbage. Black women tend to be the ones that are starting and moving these movements forward, and they're already doing enough work. I get really frustrated with how people just want hand holding, like you said, and it's not about that anymore. Like, this stuff has been around for so long. Do it yourself if you're interested in this, because we're gonna do it anyway, with or without you. So yeah, that's my little tidbit for I guess just the spaces that I'm in as a white woman, and dealing with this assumed innocence of oh, we didn't know any better. Like, you don't have that excuse anymore. Like, read a book. The internet's a thing.
I just have had a thought that, you know, in this movement, but even 5 years ago, I mean, almost throughout all of this, I have seen the leadership strongest from the women, more so than the men, 100%. And I mean, even a couple of the men leaders that I've been very excited to follow, and like, I believe their heart is in the right place. I've also come across some moments recently where it's like they seem a little vulnerable in their leadership, and I think that that's something that we need to take into consideration, as you know, any revolution should, in that, you know, leaders are going to be attacked or try to be picked apart, especially when they're at their strongest. And so, you know, for the women to have a stronger, you know, armor against that, I think it's important that we support them. And Joe, do you have anything you want to throw in there?
Yeah, and with intersectionality basically talks about all oppression being connected in some form or fashion. And Rue, to kind of build upon what you were saying earlier, and obviously with yourself, Kat, about Black women leading movements. Let's not forget the Black Lives Matter movement was created by 3 Black women, Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi. 3 Black women that have created this entire movement that is permeated all aspects and all facets of life and society as we know it. And the struggle has now no longer become just a domestic struggle. The struggle has now been internationalized. We're seeing Black Lives Matter protests in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. We're seeing them in Toronto, Canada. We're seeing them in Berlin, Germany. We're seeing protests in Vilnius, Lithuania. We're seeing them in Paris, France. And speaking of intersectionality, we're seeing not only a Black Lives Matter protest, but the continuation of the Gilets Jaunes protest, the Yellow Vest movement that's taking place in Paris, France, and another movement that is gaining momentum called the Gilets Noirs movement, which is making sure that undocumented workers from Africa who come to France for work get their citizenship papers and their working permits so they're not exploited by corporate interests. So again, when you talk about intersectionality, there's a perfect example of that, because you have Black Lives Matter, Gilets Jaunes, Gilets Noirs, all together in one country, and the Black Lives Matter movement started in the United States. So all of that matters, including Black lives.
Do you feel comfortable? And I don't know if this is, you know, this is definitely not a question, you know, I'm not interested in attacking your character in the slightest. I just, you know, in the context of what Kat and Rue and I, you know, what we were just discussing in terms of males, male Black males, in their, in the way that that Rue was kind of describing the experience. Have you seen that? Is that something that you're conscious of?
I'm conscious of it, but I stay away from it. I'm conscious of it, but I stay away from it because it doesn't do any movement any good to come from a marginalized people, then choose to marginalize somebody else. That's nonsensical. That's absurd. It's immoral. It's immoral. And if I'm going to be a Black person that's going to fight white supremacy and oppression, then I should be the last person trying to oppress somebody else. That doesn't make any sense. And I'm sure our parents have used this phrase, two wrongs don't make a right. And in this instance, two wrongs, me committing a wrong, like trying to marginalize a Black woman or any woman for that matter, makes no sense. It's wrong. It's stupid. So all my Black brothers cut it out. Stop. Don't do that. Support Black women. Believe Black women. Trust Black women. Follow Black women.
Ru?
Yeah, I also wanted to say, like, in having made that blanket statement, I would, you know, and now not to walk it back or not to, like, not all men, but it's important that I have some really great comrades in the movement, and even if men themselves individually are not intentionally, you know, actively oppressing or, you know, participating in these behaviors that actively oppress, we all have examples of it because we have the history of, like, the Black Panthers. Like, there would be no Black Power movement without the Black Panthers. Of course, an organization and a movement that was just rife with, like, these very struggles that we're talking about. When we talk about Elaine Brown and you know, her Taste of Power autobiography, she speaks very specifically about the abuse that she, you know, was under. So it's the intersectionality of the oppression. I like that Joe Nice said that, because it is like, okay, you have to figure out what your position is within this community that you belong to, and then you also have to fight the power every single day. So it is a really complicated thing. And I think that because it's complicated and because, you know, there are, even without intention, sometimes the intersection of oppression that exists within the Black community, we have to, I go back to that, like, Stokely Carmichael sentiment when he says, you know, you have to sort of disorganize the heterosexual men and organize the women, because the women are going to get it together no matter what. There's not going to be these, like, specific hangups around, like, sex and gender that exists with the women. I do think we need to work harder as, like, cis heterosexual women. We have to work harder on, like, trans rights and on being more effective within the supporting our trans sisters, right, and brothers, but particularly our trans sisters. And I don't have the answers to that, but we have lots of examples of what it looks like to see really great comrades, and then also, you know, some comrades who could use some work around that. So I bet if in, you know, Joe Nice's movement that he's not oppressing, you know, all these amazing Black women, and you know, I feel heard with you, I feel seen by you, I feel supported by you, I feel like you are someone who respects what I have to say. But that's just you, though, you know what I mean? Like, everyone's not Joe Nice. You know, like the average guy walking down the street is not Joe Nice. So, you know, it's I wish that we all could have that, you know, that je ne sais quoi in fact.
So I was going to ask, I'm sorry if maybe it's the wrong, but I did notice that the LGBT movement had, you know, it was obviously June, and it was it's the month, right? Yeah, so, you know, there was automatic intersectionality last month in terms of these fights. And did we see anything different this year than maybe other years, or did we see moments of that actually happening any differently? I'm curious if anyone took note of that at all, or if we want to just go into more of that in terms of the LGBTQ struggle and the overlapping with maybe this movement.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. I think that obviously things were different because of COVID-19 and just not being able to hold events as we would normally. But I think that the most noteworthy thing that happened in June for Pride was a lack of taking the message and putting it onto the LGBTQ plus community and putting it in the forefront. The community, for the most part, in my view, and what I saw, was was able to just use their month to support the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think that that is the most noteworthy thing, is like you didn't really see people go, oh, but wait, you know, LGBTQ lives matter too. Like, no, these people understand the nuances of intersectional existence. And so they for the most part, you know, amplified voices rather than taking away from and separating and doing their own thing because it was their month. So
we did see the big the big win in the Supreme Court upholding the Civil Rights Act for those folks. So that was exciting, and you know, I think that's the excitement we want to continue to feel in terms of people feeling safe in this country to be who they are. Yeah, I mean, this whole like double discrimination, you know, the idea of like of going through your life in this country and having 2 or 3 different ways possibly of being discriminated against in 2020 in America is just mind-boggling. And you know, to be impacted by all these different levels of you know, the justice system and just multiple forces is something that you know, we're working on. So what is it that we can do in terms of intersectionality and that concept, and how can we incorporate it, and how can our viewers and our listeners and people who are a part of this revolution, how is it that they can take that term and put it to work, I guess, put it to use? Joe?
I think a great way that anyone who is involved with Revolution 2020 can use and utilize intersectionality as communication. Continue to communicate with people who don't look like you, who are from a different country, who have a different gender or sexual orientation, or who are from a different socioeconomic class or status than you. Because
Sure,
everyone's going through something somewhere along the line, and it's a lot. I think right now, if you communicate, and communication is the transfer of meaning and understanding of meaning. And I think if you communicate with people on an honest level and have conversations with people that might be difficult, and they're supposed to be difficult, because Kat, you keep saying this, and Rue, you've said it before, this is work. It's supposed to be difficult. It's supposed to be hard. And you can't always have someone hold your hand when you're trying to do this work. There's sometimes you're just gonna have to have faith in what's going to happen next, and believe that, you know what, yeah, I'm going to be a better human being because I've been able to find a struggle that I had with somebody else who I've never interacted with before, who I have nothing in common with, who if there wasn't necessarily a struggle, I wouldn't necessarily be in any sort of conversation or dialogue or discourse with this person at all. But because you have something in common with that person, it's a lot easier to continue the fight together because of that reason. And I think the more we communicate, the more we have an understanding and a respect for each other, not just as people in the struggle, but a respect for each other as human beings across the board. That's when I think this movement is going to flourish even more.
And I think that one element of commonality that that's been front of mind for me for years, if not my whole life, and still is this year more than ever, before this all kind of exploded and throughout it. And as I look ahead, I'm just like, how can we, especially leading up to this election, start to recognize that like this movement for justice, like this movement for respect and against oppression of people of color, and all these other movements and justice groups that we can discuss in this intersectionality conversation, like where is the conversation happening that in terms of economic justice, in terms of our like freedom of like democracy, like so much of what we want to see happen and change is not really it doesn't feel possible with the way that democracy and voting and just being represented is working today, has been working for decades. Doesn't seem to be, in terms of corruption, and in terms of worker, just having work and having healthcare and having not being in poverty. I mean, I keep reminding people it seems as though that's where this is headed. This country is, I don't think they're going to continue to just feed and pay everyone that's not working for the rest of the year, let alone next year. And we're facing something, and on a level of scary for me that's even worse than what we're all observing and fighting this year. So I'm wondering if that is where it can go down. If we can, that seems like something that is occurring to so many, no matter your gender or sexual orientation or race. And so, it's not, but at the same time, it's like, do I take my voice and my words and my podcast and everything and start to like focus on that, which is what I did with Occupy back in the day and what I've always done, and like fight corruption and fight for those things. Sometimes it feels like it would be a distraction, or it would be fighting in like a different corner, or like a whole different ring. And I think that makes me like afraid to do it, because I don't want to like let go of being a part of this. And I want to see this happen as soon as possible, immediately, in terms of like defunding the police and justice in the criminal system. So,
and Richard, all of that makes sense. And I think you should continue to speak out about all of these topics, because all of these topics goes back to what exactly this conversation is about, intersectionality, which is exactly why you should be talking about all of these things. So it's exactly why you should have a diverse group of people every Tuesday evening having these conversations about varied topics, because these varied topics have an intersectional point of view to them, whether it's an economic struggle, whether it's LGBTQ rights, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's indigenous rights, whether it's environmental racism, whether it's social justice, whether it's criminal justice reform, whether it's economic, whether it's trying to reduce and eliminate the racial wealth gap in the United States and in Canada and other countries where there's a wide disparity of wealth inequality. So again,
I think we got halfway down the list there.
Again,
you could have kept going.
Well, there's a bunch more. But I don't want to take up all the air. You know what I'm saying? I mean, there's a lot going on, but keep having these conversations, please, because again, the more we communicate with people, and the more we communicate with more people, diverse people across the board, the more people will understand, hey, you know what? We're being screwed all the way around by our governments. Our governments are not taking care of us. And it doesn't matter if you're a white woman who's just lost her job, or if you're a single Black woman with 3 kids who's lost her job. There's a struggle that's common amongst all of us, amongst them and all of them.
I appreciate you saying that. And that is the beauty of intersectionality, Rich, being able to, focus on more than one struggle, and then also being able to hyper focus on your struggle and see where it intersects with the struggles of others. And what Joe Nice said about their struggle to be, there's so much struggle to be found. We can connect. Also, intersectionality doesn't always have to be about like the oppression Olympics, right? It can also be the coming together of these coalitions, like Black and brown people, that intersectionality coming together. And I think it's so important to really see the fabric of these movements as able to connect with all other movements, because that's the only way that we're going to make any real progress. And I think getting the focus on where the struggle is and the cause of the struggle, because that's also how we get out of our own way of then infighting with each other and talking about like, that's, we separate ourselves. So I think if we're really able to identify from where the struggle comes, and then all the people, places, and things that are affected come together and make a bigger, broader statement. I'm hyper-focused right now on like, defunding the police and the politics of city government, all these things that are not, I don't know how I became like a leader in this, because I have a political background, but my most of my knowledge has always been about like, artists and like national news and things of that nature. So I'm like delving into city budgets and all this stuff. And I'm like, this isn't even like usually where I belong in the conversation. But this is the intersectionality of my voice needing to be heard in these spaces. So I think that you just will find that if you focus on what you're good at and where you're most effective in the movement, you're going to look up and then all of a sudden realize that you've crossed the street with like all these other people as well, and you've connected with them at these levels. So
yeah, everyone needs to be represented. So if you can identify with a social group or an artist group or any group, and that's you, then you got a place at the table. You got a voice to be heard at the city government level. And I wish that was more understood and like something that people were taught throughout their lives, and that it felt real. And I think that's what America's struggling with right now, is it doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel like it would make a difference or it works. And unfortunately so much of it doesn't. But I was looking at a note that I had from watching Kimberly Crenshaw's talk, and in the context of intersectionality within this, struggle for cops that are killing Black Americans, and finding that, more the movement from like mourning and grief to action and transformation. And I think that's an amazing, that right now, everything we just talked about for so many minutes, there's so much mourning and so much grief for our position as citizens, what's going on with our jobs, our family members that got sick, our friends that are getting, killed by cops. Like there's so much that we can find common ground on in terms of that. And really it's just finding common ground in the action and in the transformation, and how do we work together to make a change, is what's been elusive for a long time. This is not just this year, it's been moving for a while. I also had something that's come to mind for me in terms of I thought right away about something that I think about a lot, which is the March on Washington, 1968, the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Quite possibly, like, out of any historical video or moment that I've ever seen, the most important one, I think, in my life, in terms of just seeing, Americans amass for something, and to see that create something, the Civil Rights Act of 64. I mean, it is a piece of history that it occurred in that way, but there wasn't people. I don't think a whole bunch of people necessarily know how that even came about. And, terms of, they didn't just show up and start hanging out on the mall that day. They really did have to communicate with the government for, I think, over a year, get that set up so that it was like, done right and in a safe way. And it wasn't just civil rights. It was an alliance of civil rights, labor, religious organizations that came together under the banner of jobs and freedom, to make something happen. So in terms of making something happen here, it's like, I don't know how they didn't make something happen without intersectionality, without different groups and leaders coming together. And I did get word, I think we all did in last month, of Al Sharpton and the family of George Floyd putting together National Action Network, putting together a commitment march, get your knee off our necks, I believe is the name of it. It's supposed to be going down August 28th this year, the 57th anniversary of the I Have a Dream speech in the March on Washington. And I don't know if you guys have heard much about that, or I did read that it is I think they got like it approved for like 100,000 people. There was at least 200,000 people at the march in 68. So, I don't think it would be on that level, but, I know I'm wondering, am I supposed to be getting plane tickets? Is that like a thing? I just haven't seen a whole lot about it, but.
Well, supposedly, from what I've seen and read and heard, it is supposedly going to be taking place in Washington, D.C. So needless to say, I will be taking the MARC train from Baltimore down to Washington, D.C.,
Okay.
and I will be finding myself there nice and easy. I will make sure I have a mask. If COVID-19 is still ever present, I'll have my alcohol wipes just in case. And, you know, I'll be wearing a yellow vest because that's what I do when I go to these pride marches and protests. So I will be there. I'm not missing that.
Yeah, I'm gonna be there too, because I typically split my time anyway between Denver and DC. So I'm 100% pulling up. Absolutely.
I didn't know you were from DC.
I'm not from DC, but I lived there for one whole year working on 2 big festivals, and then they both obviously got canceled because of COVID. So I've been sheltering in place in Denver, but typically I'm in DC a lot. It's a great city. But I also find myself sometimes wondering, like, do I want to storm down there and demand a meeting at the Justice Department? Like, I have to, like, stop myself. They're right down the street, so I could just pull up on Mitch McConnell or something and just go off. So, but yeah, I haven't heard too much. I haven't heard too much about like other people making these, you know, massive plans to go down there. A lot of people don't really fuck with Sharpton, and you know, I understand the history of that. I personally fuck with Sharpton on the levels that I think that he brings to the movement, and you know, also as someone from New York, and you know, all of that. So yeah, I think that might be a part of it too.
He doesn't seem to be shy about showing up and representing these families that have lost a member of their family. And I don't think there's a lot of other celebrities or politicians that you can say the same for, which is sad. You know, why isn't there a line of them that are willing to take their private jets to see the families or whatever, or at least go to the funeral? Has anybody has anything been brewing for you, Kat? You got any other do we miss anything about this topic? I know that you guys a couple times.
I could talk about this all day, but I appreciate all the input. It's been really thought-provoking, so thank you. Yeah, I think that there was one thing that I wanted to kind of discuss. I am in Toronto, so I'm in Canada, and I won't be going to the USA because the border's still closed. And I anticipate
this down here.
Yeah, fair. So, but one thing I have noticed is that the intersection of racialized groups in the Toronto protests for Black Lives Matter and to defund the police has been really great, because there are a lot of Indigenous groups here, and it has been just a smooth sort of collaboration or coalition between the Black Lives Matter movement and Indigenous folks. And so I think that there are so many examples of this, you know, in practice right now and historically, that we can totally just keep this conversation going, and with ease too, because I think for me personally, I think intersectionality is a natural occurrence within these movements, because they do come from the ground up. They are grassroots in nature. And so when we get rid of these systems that are top down, which come from, you know, the capitalistic sense and have been upholding oppression and systemic oppression, like, we can get rid of that part and just, you know, build our new world, whatever that is, from the ground up. And I think that that's the beautiful part of intersectionality that I love. So I don't know if anyone has a response to that, but
thank you so much. And I think we got about, you know, a few more minutes left. So maybe Joe and Rue, you can kind of do some closing statements, and then I'll do a poem and we'll carry on.
You go first, Rue.
Okay. Well, I've enjoyed this conversation, and I think that if we are going to have a movement that is going to be impactful and that will include all of the people, then it must be intersectional. It must center around our most marginalized, and we must have a clear strategy for moving all of the people forward. And I think that for those of us for whom organizing and strategy is a knack, let's jump out there and get into the work. And for those of us who allow intersectionality to happen naturally. Let's continue to recognize when it's happening, and let's expand and make it happen more, and stand up for those when we can. And thank you, Richard. This has been, it's a really important conversation, and one that I think hasn't been touched on enough within this latest social uprising, either because we're doing it already and don't realize it, or we haven't actually directly noticed that we're doing it. So this conversation, I think, puts everyone on notice that intersectionality is the catalyst for all the change we're going to see. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. We got to keep this one going 100%. It's kind of the key, I think. All right, Joe.
First of all, thanks to everybody. Thanks to you, Richard, Kat, Rue, for jumping on again. This is awesome. I love it. Love each of you. This is magical. Second of all, I want to thank everybody that's eventually going to watch this video. If you like what we're doing, comment, share, get the message out there, because again, communication is the way we continue these conversations. Rue, I want to piggyback on something you said a couple of minutes ago. You said, hey, you know what? We also need to have movements that are centralized around our most marginalized people. What we also need to do is also have policies. I'm a big on policy. And again, I've said this before in several speeches that I've given at several different rallies and all my live and direct chats and our Joe and Kat chats with Kat. You know, it's all well and good that you have a bunch of people walking the streets saying no justice, no peace, no racist police. But you know what? What does justice look like? What does defunding the police look like? What does that look like? What does justice for Breonna Taylor looks like? And by the way, those cops still haven't arrested her. You haven't been arrested yet.
I wake up and think about it most every day right now.
So let's, again, policy. A couple of book suggestions. Again, this, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Dr. Ibram Kendi. Everybody needs to read this book.
That's awesome.
Everybody needs to read this book, okay? And if you're illiterate, find an audio book.
I reached out to him, actually, to be on the show.
Good.
He's doing a free talk. I'll send this to you. There's an Eventbrite for this free talk that he's doing. Okay. It's this week, I think. I'll send it to you.
Excellent. So everybody should read this book. Read it. Let it sink in. Buy it for a friend. Don't get it on Audible, because that's Amazon. We don't support that. Second, again, Kat and I talked about this book today, The Color of Law. It talks about segregation and racist housing policies in the United States. Again, policy. Okay, it's all well and good that we're saying, hey, you know what? No justice, no peace. Policy, because again, you can't change a racist's mind, but you can change a racist policy.
What's your shirt say?
What is my shirt? Okay, my shirt says, how many more public executions must we witness? When shall we rise? By a spoken word artist and MC in the dubstep community named Ryder Shafiq. Out to Ezra and Tracy at Them Records for sending me this shirt.
Oh, yeah.
Love Ezra and Tracy. Polygon Press, best record label out there. Love them.
Shout out dubstep.
And after their daughter Adila, who is the coolest 11-year-old of all time.
How's your daughter doing?
She's 11 now. My partner is awesome. She's at the beach. She's at the beach, and yeah, we FaceTimed the other day, and she was like, "Daddy, look, I'm at the beach," and she's in a lounge chair with a drink with an umbrella in it. I'm like, whoa, that better be a fruit juice, sweetheart. What are you talking about? That better be a pineapple juice with nothing in it.
Well, we have reached the end of
She's chilling.
The end of Fear and Loving with Ranch today, and we're going to try to make these a little shorter and a little sweeter from here on out, and we will be back in a couple weeks, and who knows exactly which topic we're going to land on next week. It's so much happening all the time, and we're trying to stay relevant with it. And let's see, and you can go to the handle Real Fear and Loving to find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Vimeo. Trying to work on that YouTube, but we're gonna have to step up those subscribers. So please subscribe to us on YouTube, and that is where you can find this conversation and these roundtables recorded. And I'm gonna hit them with a poem from 2013 called Equanimities. Let me get it queued up here. Okay. And this was written, I don't know, I think maybe the day after the Boston bombing, very, very closely after that. I was actually here in Boston. It was pretty nuts. So equanimities, shaking happenings in DC, bombings in Boston, enemies lurking behind dark ideas, those who want unrest permanently, they will not attain their low goals. The light workers, they do not fear, they endure as the sun does. Bodies of rays and potential, an infinite myriad of forms that live with change fully. But we cannot forget our place. Flimsy is our lives, flimsy is our meaning, insignificant if we allow it to be so. Universe shaking if we make it so. Seeing outside the normal spectrum, suffering in any respect is only another facet of the beloved that which we revere. Devastation, destruction, evil, pain, these are realities and tests of the soul. Only viable option is to hold tight to that brightness that is everything. Police, artists, councilmen, priests, teachers, bankers, they're only humans. Righteous or not, loving or not, understanding or not, forgiving or not, true or not, it is not out of our hands, and we all have options. Big ups. Love you guys so much. Looking forward to talking again, and good luck with all your work. It's a daily thing. I know it is. And you guys can, you readers or your listeners out there can reach out to me to get in touch with any of these fine folks. So thanks again.